Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Robin Gregg, and I'm the CEO of RoadSync. And we're going to talk about strategies for chargeback and dispute protection. So really appreciate you joining us. Give you a little bit of information about me. I am a longtime payments person. I've spent over 20 years in the payments industry and have worked at places like Capital One, FleetCor, and most recently have been running RoadSync since 2017. So I had lots of experience with the challenges of payments, chargebacks, disputes, and really am happy to be here today and share a little bit about, why chargebacks exist, what are the different types of chargebacks that towing businesses often experience, and what are some things that you can do to both prevent chargebacks and also fight them when they occur. All right. So let's start off with what is a chargeback? So we know you've probably all experienced them, and especially if you take card payments and been taking card payments for a long time. And chargebacks are really just the customer when they are the payer when they actually dispute or want to reverse a card payment when something goes wrong. So it basically allows them to undo a transaction if they think that there was a merchant mistake, they didn't get the service or the product that they were supposed to, or if there's fraud. I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with how chargebacks work because you've experienced them, but wanted to give folks a little bit sense of like the time frame and the timeline of what happens when you get a chargeback from your processor, sort of what's happening in the background. So typically, a customer has anywhere from 60 to 120 days to file a dispute with their card issuer. So that could be Chase, Capital One, Amex, whoever actually supports their card program. That's who they are filing a dispute with. I think maybe as consumers, we've all had experience doing that ourselves. Usually you can do it online. And usually the customer is not doing much more than answering a few questions about why they want to dispute this transaction. When that happens, the bank or card issuer will issue a temporary credit to the customer. Usually they do that immediately within 1 to 2 business days. And then the merchant is notified of a chargeback and given a response window. And one of the challenging things about this, especially as a merchant to deal with, is that those response windows can be really varied based on the needs of the issuer, how quickly your processor informed you, there's just different time frames. It could be anywhere from 7 to 20 days for you to respond to this chargeback, gather the necessary evidence. And in the meantime, most processors are going to take the funds that were disputed back from you, plus a chargeback fee, which can be anywhere from $10 to $50, depending on who you're working with. Once you've submitted all that evidence about the chargeback, the bank's going to review it, and the time frame under which they'll review it really varies. Usually there's not a firm commitment to exactly when they're going to respond to you. It can be days or weeks. And then when the bank makes a decision on whether or not they think the chargeback that the customer filed is valid, the funds are either returned to the merchant or they are kept and returned to the customer. And then there's a final step that I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with, and we actually really don't encourage our customers to do it because it's really expensive. But if you're a merchant who loses a chargeback, especially if it's a big dollar one, sometimes people will file for an appeal through arbitration, and you have to file that within 10 days of the decision. And then the card network will review the case for a final decision. It usually takes 30 to 45 days. And arbitration is pretty expensive. So it's usually upwards of $100 to $200 when you have arbitration. But sometimes if it's a really big dollar ticket transaction and you want to dispute it, it can make sense to do. But that's the basic process. This whole thing from beginning to end can take up to 8 weeks. And in the meantime, your funds are sort of clogged up by this process, whether or not it's a legitimate chargeback. So certainly understand why they're frustrating. So the reason these things exist in the first place is really to create faith in the payment networks and to get customers being willing to use these payment cards. So it's a tool to guard against fraud when cards are stolen or misused. It's a way to build consumer confidence through protection with card payments. It really encourages people to use cards versus cash, provides a mechanism for dispute resolution for when products and services are not as the customer expected. And then it's about creating a set of standardized rules throughout the payment system. But we understand they're challenging for the merchant, and this is the thing that we're helping our towing businesses with all the time because we know this is really costly. Towing services are pretty prone to having chargeback issues, and we know that every dispute means lost revenue plus chargeback fees. So if you have a tow and it's $500 service, you're probably out $500 plus $15 to $100, depending on the chargeback fee that your processor is charging you. If you actually continue to have high chargeback rates, they can trigger increased processing costs. So some processors will actually charge sort of a penalty rate. And that's part of the issue, something some of the issuers will do if you look like you're high risk. And that's triggered when you have high chargebacks. If you have too many chargebacks overall for a prolonged period of time, it can jeopardize your ability to accept cards. And so that's generally when you are above 1% of your transactions for a long period of time. And then finally, managing disputes requires time. Getting all this documentation together is really labor intensive. It's frustrating, and it's, it can seem like a kind of a black box when you're trying to defend yourself against chargeback. So I wanted to share a little bit about what kinds of chargebacks we see in the towing service space, and sort of what our experience is. So our overall chargeback rate for customers that are in the towing business on our platform is a little bit less than 0.5%. And so that's our customers are dealing with chargebacks that they're not above that 1% that will trigger problems. But we do see a fair amount of chargebacks in the towing sector. And we see 3 different types of chargebacks with customers on our platform. The biggest category is dissatisfaction. So examples of dissatisfaction are when the service is not completed, when the service is not done on time, when maybe it wasn't done as expected. The second most common and probably one of the most frustrating and difficult to manage for our customers is fraud. So examples of that are when people make payments with stolen cards, when there's unauthorized use of a card, maybe by an employee or a family member. And then the final reason that people receive chargebacks on our platform that we sort of experience is errors. And this happens when people maybe you haven't processed a refund in a timely manner. The wrong amount was charged. Maybe people inverted 2 digits when they were entering in a payment amount. And it's pretty uncommon, but error is another reason why we see people have chargebacks. And the win rate can vary pretty dramatically based on the type of chargeback it is. So error is the easiest thing for folks to win. Our customers have about an 80% win rate when they respond to an error chargeback. And that's because you can usually easily prove whether or not you did the thing that you charged the right amount. You usually have an invoice or other things to back it up. The second highest thing to be able to defend against is dissatisfaction, because you can show your service records, maybe photos of the service that you offered, and really show that you actually did the thing that the customer is disputing. And then the last one is fraud, and that's the hardest because the onus is on you to prove that the person who made the transaction is actually the cardholder. And so sometimes that can be difficult to verify, and that therefore is one of the hardest things for people to win. So the best way to combat chargebacks is to prevent them from happening in the first place. So we think about that and recommend, no matter who your processor is, if it's us or somebody else, that you think about that in a couple of different ways. The first is make sure you're using the most secure payment mechanism. So if you're dealing with online transactions, one of the most secure ways to make sure that transaction is valid and not fraud is using a tool called 3DS, which I'm going to describe a little bit more in detail if you're not familiar with it. Another way to make sure it's secure is use card present when possible. So, using a card swiper and using a card with a chip and making sure the card is physically present is helpful and is more secure. Ensure that the payer IDs match the cardholder name. Use something called AVS and CVV verification for online transactions. I'm also going to describe that in a little bit more detail. And then also things like Apple Pay, biometrics, Google Pay, those are also more secure than taking a transaction over the phone and manually keying it in. The second way to defeat chargebacks and sort of minimize them is to make sure you're setting clear expectations with your customers upfront about fees, time frames that the work's going to be done, have everything documented and signed off via work orders, make sure your invoices are super detailed, and that you really are getting customer sign-off and acknowledgement throughout the process. And maintaining those records can be really helpful, especially for making sure that you are heading off dissatisfaction concerns. The third thing that we recommend and helps a lot is making sure you have very clear refund and cancellation policies that you provide to your customers up front when you are providing them services and they're signing off on those. And then the last is just making sure you have good payment collection procedures. So make sure your staff are really well trained in collecting payments in a timely manner. Make sure that you're processing refunds quickly. And then just a tactical thing, we see that some folks don't have their merchant name that's actually posted on people's cardholder statements through their processor, exactly matching their business name on invoices and other things like that. So if you're doing business as Bob's Towing and on the cardholder statement, it says Smith Towing, that can be really confusing, and that leads to chargebacks. And that's just a really easy thing to fix and make sure that you're kind of keeping those things consistent.
Robin?
Yeah?
We have a quite lengthy from Tashana is asking, well, using a different card processor, we had a chargeback of $1,589. We submitted photos of the job, screenshots of communication with the customer, authorizations to use the card. The customer presented. The processor took the $1,589 from us 3 times for the same chargeback. We had our bank contacting on our behalf. Still, this money was already returned. Still lost the entire $4,767 plus chargeback fees on each time they took the money back. For future reference, if this should happen again, would arbitration be recommended?
It depends on what the type of chargeback was. If it was a dissatisfaction, if it was fraud, it really just depends on what type it was. And then also the arbitration fees are going to be per transaction. So I can't tell based on what you said, and I'm happy to sort of talk to somebody afterwards, but it sounded like there are multiple transactions. So the problem with pursuing arbitration is it would have been for a fee if you lost on each and every transaction. It's hard to say based on that information whether or not arbitration would have been suitable. If it was one big dollar charge, then possibly. And if it was for some reason other than fraud, it might have been worth pursuing, especially if you felt like your documentation was well done. But it's kind of hard to tell based on the information I have.
Well, why would they have taken it 3 times?
Taken what 3 times?
The money, the 1,000.
The
1,589. They took it 3 times.
They should not take it 3 times. They should only take it once. And so that's an issue probably to address with your card processor. Because if there's only one transaction, they can only take it from you once.
See, so that's what we wanted to know. One transaction returned to customer 3 times.
Yeah, that feels like a concern that is a processing issue with the processor. If it's only one transaction, the processor can't take the same transaction from you 3 times. That seems like an operational thing, unless it was returned. Sometimes it's something that happens is it gets returned and then taken again, returned and taken again. If it sort of goes through a sort of a multi-step process, because one of the things I didn't talk about is not only does the merchant have the right to arbitration, sometimes the customer also has the right to resubmit the dispute if they don't get the answer, if they lose it. So maybe that's what happened. Again, it's hard to tell. But if it was just flat out taken, one $1,500 transaction 3 times, that feels like an issue to take up with the processor.
Yeah, which was Square, evidently, they said. It says to contact the lawyer, who says to take it to small claims court. That completes that conversation.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Sorry, I could not provide a more satisfying answer. It's kind of hard to tell with the information at hand. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the tools that are available in terms of prevention, because we understand for towing services, a lot of these transactions are done either online or, we recommend not, but over the phone or manually. So usually a lot of times the card holder is not in front of you. So there are 2 tools that we highly recommend that make things more secure. So the first is 3DS. 3DS is a tool that Visa, MasterCard, and Amex all offer, and it's a security protocol for protecting and verifying online transactions. So what happens is when you have a 3DS transaction enabled, the cardholder will receive a notification like the one you see on the right-hand side that requires them to verify their identity. This really reduces the incident of fraud. It only helps with fraud transactions in disputes, but it can be pretty substantial improvement, especially when you're dealing with sort of online or sort of remote transactions. So we really do recommend using 3DS. Another tool that is more common and very readily available is AVS or CVV. So AVS, I think folks probably are familiar with this because you probably see some of these things yourself, but AVS is an address verification, which compares a customer's billing address to the address on file with the card issuer. So this is when you're putting in your zip code and making sure your zip code matches. That does help make sure that the card holder that is giving you that card number is actually the real card holder. And then the last one is CVV, which is that 3, or if it's an Amex, 4-digit code on credit cards. Again, that's another way of verifying that the card holder actually is holding the physical card, and you're not dealing with somebody who is, dealing with a stolen card and trying to make purchases.
Gigi asks, how do we get 3DS?
It's through your processor. We offer it to our customers. I think there probably are a couple other processors that offer it as well. But if you are interested in 3DS, we'd be happy to talk to you about it. It's not super common for B2B transactions yet, but there are a fair amount of processors in addition to us who offer it.
So also Morgan has stated that they have not lost a chargeback yet since being with RoadSync for over 6 months.
Well, we appreciate that. All right. One last note on preventing chargebacks. I mean, one of the things we handle chargebacks on behalf of our customers. So we're doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of helping them compile chargeback evidence and making sure they have the right setup and business processes to combat chargebacks. But one of the things that we want to make sure that folks understand is, part of fighting chargebacks is kind of identifying suspicious behavior. People who want to commit fraud are always getting increasingly more clever about how they do it. And again, fraud chargebacks are the hardest ones to win because it's the one that you have to verify that you actually identified the right card holder and it was actually that person. So a couple of tips for that from us. The first is phone orders are really difficult as far as protecting yourself against chargebacks, especially if it's a new customer. So if you have a phone order for a new customer, especially if it's a high dollar value thing like parts or tires, definitely be suspicious and be more careful about verifying who that payer is. The second thing is any order with a third-party courier or pickup. So, if the person who's picking up the tires or batteries, that's usually where we see it, is not the person who is making the payment, you ought to be suspicious and require more verification. Anytime the cardholder name doesn't match payer or company name, you should be suspicious because you're going to have a hard time, defending yourself against that type of chargeback if it comes back disputed. Another thing we see is when people are using multiple cards for a single transaction because they keep getting declined. So 3+, 5+. I mean, it's not uncommon for folks to have a card or two decline and they have to try another card. But when you start getting into lots of cards, it usually indicates that somebody's trying to test a bunch of fraudulent cards. If you're dealing with a payer who can't or won't show identifying information, unusually high dollar value purchases, especially from a customer that you're not familiar with, that's something you should be suspicious of. And then just your gut. So if this purchase or whatever's happening seems off or too good to be true, we certainly encourage you to think about that.
Is there a downside for customer who fraudulently initiates a chargeback?
Well, no, not really. I think at some point, I mean, the issuers are very permissive about allowing payers to issue chargebacks. It's pretty easy to do. You just have to answer a few questions. I do think they start getting suspicious and might cut you off from doing it if you do a lot. So basically, like you can't charge back your whole credit card statement. But if you're doing a couple here or there, like they don't know, whether or not you win or lose one. There's really not a penalty for a consumer if they lose a chargeback. So it only gets problematic if they try to do a lot of them.
Is it legal to take a picture of the credit card and picture ID as proof?
For PCI purposes, we really don't recommend you take a picture of that credit card. Other identifiers are better. But the credit card number is not something that you're supposed to have unless you can store it in a very, very secure way.
Ryan McGrail asked, why is RoadSync quick to notify you of the chargeback but slow to update you on the status? Do you give weekly updates even if there is nothing new?
We don't. We actually are working on improving our notification processes to be more regular. But as we talked about at the beginning, the chargeback process is very slow and highly variable. So we typically notify folks when there is an actual decision or a decision or information to be provided. We don't just give them an update, hey, it's week 2 of the process. But we are working on a module people can self-serve and kind of look at the status themselves.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So despite your best efforts, you're going to get a chargeback anyway. It just happens in this industry. This is something that folks are going to have to handle. Even our customers will get them from time to time. And the next step is just making sure that you are adequately prepared for fighting and providing the right information. So the number one reason our customers lose their chargebacks is they don't respond at all. We have a lot of information on our system about what happened and how a transaction was processed, but we don't always have all the customer communications. We don't have the backstory. We may not have copies of all of the policies. So, it really is important for you to think about responding to all of your chargebacks. Even chargebacks where you don't feel like you have great evidence, if you're doing this on your own with a Square or some other processor, you should submit anyway. We win chargebacks all the time on, not having the best of evidence because it is really dependent upon how much evidence the payer provided as well. And so even if you might have a not super detailed invoice and that's what you're providing and you're kind of concerned you don't have the whole story, you really don't know what the payer submitted either. So your evidence still might be better and you still may win. So we really encourage you to respond to absolutely every chargeback that you can, as long as it's high dollar and a value enough. Like probably don't respond to a $10 chargeback, but give it a try. It's worth it. You might win it. The second is pay very close attention to the deadlines and always respond with whatever documentation you have. When you are responding to a chargeback, it's really important to have a very organized set of documents, a timeline of what happens. And all of those things go a long way because it's really your story competing against the payer's story. And you have an opportunity to put something that's really well organized, and that will be something that someone can read and sort of make a decision on. So the clearer it is, the better off you're going to be. Provide documentation that matches the chargeback reasons. So we didn't talk about this in detail because it's pretty detailed, but like for every single chargeback you get, even beyond fraud or dissatisfaction, you're going to get a specific code on what happened and some information on what kind of dissatisfaction. Is it with the service? Is it with something else? So make sure you're responding to whatever that issue is in the chargeback reason. And so for something like dissatisfaction, make sure you're providing details on the work done, pictures, customer communications about the services, any sign-offs the customer have made. And then for something like fraud, you need to make sure that you are providing details on what you did to verify that the cardholder was legitimate. Did you check their ID? Did you do ADS or CVV verifications and did that clear? Is this a repeat customer? Is this someone you've worked with over a year and all of a sudden now they're just crying fraud against a transaction that, is most likely legitimate because they're somebody you work with on an ongoing basis. All those things can be helpful. All right. So just to recap, we encourage folks to just fight chargebacks by making sure you're using the best payment solutions possible to prevent fraud. There always are new tools and sort of technology that can help eliminate or reduce, not eliminate, so nothing eliminates it, but things that will help reduce fraud. So look for providers that provide 3DS. Make sure you're not accepting cards manually or the phone when you can avoid it. Use card present, AVS, CVV verifications. Make sure you're documenting and storing everything, your policies, your service history, your customer communications. Make sure you have all that stuff visually stored so you can access it when you do have a chargeback and you can deal with it. Make sure you're aware of the timeframes for responding to chargebacks and respond in a timely manner. We're going to send everyone who's at this webinar a chargeback readiness checklist. So it kind of goes through some of the tips and you can kind of assess yourself on how well you're doing and making sure that you're prepared to both prevent and address chargebacks when you get them. And we'd be happy to see you if you'd like to learn more about what we do for our customers. Obviously we handle a lot of these things for our customers and then understand how challenging chargebacks are in towing. So we'd love to talk to you about what we do for you. And I'll talk a little bit about what we do for a second, but are there any other questions?
Yeah, there's one. You are the processor. Are the 3Ds automatic?
The 3DS is enabled. It takes a little bit to be enrolled in the process, but we do encourage folks to use it by default. Now, to be clear, 3DS only happens for online transactions. So one of the things that we do for our customers is we send payers a link to pay. 3DS will be utilized on that type of transaction, but not if you take a payment over the phone and enter it into our system. The other thing about 3DS, just to be aware of, is it only works when the card issuer is actually supporting 3DS. So there are a few like international cards that might still run on MasterCard and Visa. There might be some sort of regional card brands that might not be supporting 3DS. But if you're taking a Chase card, a Capital One card, one of the big brands, most of them are involved in the 3DS program. So we find that most cards are able to go through that process and you get that verification and security.
Is remote checkout 3DS?
It is. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So just quickly, what we do for our customers, folks might be familiar with us. We provide a payment acceptance platform for pretty much anybody who supports the trucking and towing industry through RoadSync Checkout. We not only accept the major card brands, we also accept fleet cards, which is one of the unique things that we do. We also are integrated with QuickBooks and TowBook and really use that to help support and provide a full solution for towers and repair shops. And I will spare folks the rest, but we've been in the towing industry for many years, have lots of reference clients about what we're able to do for them. and really do have a lot of unique solutions that are designed specifically for this industry in terms of how we provide work orders, how we take payments, how we handle disputes and chargebacks on behalf of our customers. You get to work with a real human on all of those things, which is one of the things that we offer to our customers. And we work with some big brands. And that's it. I'm happy to take any other questions from folks.
There is a question. We have recently been using RoadSync. We noticed that when sending a payment to link to a customer's phone, many times they leave the signature box blank, yet they are allowed to move forward. Is there a setting that can be changed that stops the customer from moving forward if nothing is entered in the signature box?
I will have to check on that. If somebody can send me, I think you have my emails right here. Send me an email and I'll make sure your customer success rep talks to you about that.
And is RoadSync considering becoming better integrated with TowBook in the future?
We are already integrated with TowBook, and we are constantly working on that integration and making sure it's a little bit more seamless for customers.
Yeah.
But that requires both of us to do work. And so I think you'll continue to see incremental improvements over time if you're using our TowBook integration. And we'd love to hear feedback on it. So if you're using it and there's something that you need, just let us know.
Okay, Michelle had a question. Does RoadSync require the 3-point AVS verification for all transactions?
We don't. It's a setting. And so that's something that we can set on our end. We recommend it for customers to have it set.
And Michelle is asking, do you see more chargebacks from American Express customers? It seems that American Express is the worst for the merchant to win a chargeback. And I'm considering not accepting American Express.
Yeah, to be honest, I actually don't think they're the worst in terms of if you just look at chargeback rate, they're not worse than any of the other card issuers. In terms of win rate, they are slightly worse. They try to be very customer friendly. And so, I think they are a little bit more likely to err on the side of the customer.
Do you suggest anything else instead of taking a picture of the credit card?
I just think any sort of ID verification that you have on the customer and also their business would be helpful. So even taking pictures of the actual physical vehicle that you're repairing, things like that can all be helpful.
There was one other question from Michelle. How can I tell if I am set to use 3DS transactions only? And is there a way if I can tell if a specific transaction went through 3DS or not?
I don't think you can tell whether or not it went through 3DS or not. As far as your setting, I encourage you to reach out to your customer success rep and they will tell you whether or not you're enrolled.
And Michelle asks again, our chargebacks are typically from our relocation side, which is when a resident or guest at a property is parked against the rules, regulations we have with the property. We have seen an increase in loss for dissatisfaction of services not as expected.
Yep.
When we provide evidence of our contract with the property, why would we continue to lose the dispute or be sent to arbitration? Is there anything else we should be submitting outside of that contract?
Well, it depends on what they're saying. So if they're saying you did damage to the vehicle or something else that's creating the dissatisfaction, there could be evidence that you're going to want to supply to do that. Obviously it's important to show that you do have the right to remove that vehicle, but making sure that it's clear that which is what your contract does. But if you have other things that people are claiming dissatisfaction for, which is oh, but there was damage. No, I actually did have a right to be there because I'm a tenant. Making sure you're answering all of those questions, because it's just kind of hard. You gotta know what the dissatisfaction claim is.
Yeah, they're saying there was no damage. They're just aren't satisfied with the service.
Yeah, those should be winnable as long as you're providing, you're kind of making sure you're ruling out the concerns about anything that could happen to the vehicle, or that it was your right to take that vehicle and move it, and they weren't in fact a tenant or somebody who was able to be there. So I just make sure you're providing all the information that you have. I mean, you're gonna lose some, especially on dissatisfaction, because they're all judgment calls, right? Like, it's basically a moderator that's looking at these things, and issuers will tend to try to give the payer the benefit of the doubt because that's their customer. So, the more information you're providing to combat these things, the better off you're going to be.
Mm-hmm. What about non-consensual towing chargebacks?
I'm not sure what that means.
No damage. They just aren't satisfied with service, or they say services weren't rendered. And what about cash only for non-con tows? Police compounds. The questions.
I would recommend reach out to us, and we will tell you what some of the best practices are. We have a lot of folks that have state or county contracts, impound lots. We know it's tricky. We can share some of the best practices there. It's not going to be perfect, right? Because it's just by definition, the customer's not going to be happy with these services. But we can share what our best practices are.
Yeah, she's saying that they didn't consent to the vehicle being towed, the customer.
Yeah.
And, that's what she was referring to as a non-consensual towing.
Yeah. And so I think that's back to the other person's question, like, showing that you had the right to tow it based on either your contract with the property owner or the county or the city, like whoever gave you permission to do it. You kind of have to demonstrate that. And then also have documentation of what the service was that you actually provided. Those are the best ways to basically address those.
That ends the questions for the moment.
Great. Well, I appreciate the time. Thanks, Mike, for having me on. Again, we're happy to connect folks. Even if you're not interested in changing process or you just want to talk about what we do, we're happy to have that conversation. And then we will be sending out as a post webinar follow-up, sort of a one-pager on some of the tips so that you can see what sorts of things we think are best practices. All right. Thanks, everybody.